O Léo, inclusive, me comunicou logo cedo, ele estava lá na sala 229, eu expliquei que seria tudo pelo Zoom. A Camila enviou o e-mail ontem. Então, bom dia a todas e todos. Vamos iniciar o nosso seminário de pós-graduação em Neurofilosofia. And we are very glad to have this morning Professor Camila Barbosa, who's going to give a talk on moral zombies, why algorithms are not moral agents. Camila, you have the floor.
All right, so we'll keep in English as
It's
usual.
up to you.
All right. Let's do that. Let's try to maintain our language of choice for this seminar. So I just prepared some slides regarding the text that was previously sent and was in a reading assignment. That I thought that was an interesting choice because it dealt with both a very traditional discussion on philosophy of mind and the philosophical zombie and how we deal with what is consciousness, and how to apply that to think about algorithm. And of course, here in the text, we have a comparison, thinking how we can imagine that today's algorithm or AI could match somehow the philosophical zombies experiment, and is another opportunity to discuss what conscious is, right? And also in this text, what conscious means to moral agency. That's the main topic here. Because then, in the end of the day, the discussion mainly that this paper deals with is how we think about both responsibility, autonomy, and also who we should consider responsible for this AI system, right? The question made is if we can consider this algorithm or developed AI system as an autonomous system, in as much as giving them both responsibility, and then, of course, you also need to give them certain rights and guarantees. So it's a discussion about how we deal with that and how we extend some sort of human, or at least something like human rights, of course, and what we consider human moral agency, human autonomy, human self-determination, and how this deal with law. So when we ask in this paper, they discussed moral agency, autonomy, self-determination, and how this system are developed, is in both sense, is to think about how we consider them, if we extend at any kind of human aspect to them, because if we do, we probably will need also to extend some sort of law or normativity regarding their own conception, right? So I divided this presentation in two moments, basically. I would first like to, I know it's a classic debate, but it's always good to recap. Maybe someone hasn't that as fresh as we wish. That is the discussion about consciousness, especially between Chalmers and Dennett, and about the dualist and physicalist or materialist perspective of what constitutes consciousness, right? And I will go through that to talk about the philosophical zombie, to recap what this discussion and what the arguments deal with. And later I will go to the point of the paper that is not so much about the conscious zombie, but how she brings this discussion to talk about moral agency, right? Because the thing is, if consciousness is somehow a criteria to deal with that, and she has a specific proposal dealing with, just a minute. The dogs are going crazy here. Sorry, guys. So I divided. I thought that I could bring up some of this discussion because it's a classical discussion, right? I try to recollect the Descartes' argumentation, of course, not about algorithm or AI, but how we deal with machines and if you could consider yourself somehow of the machines, right? Where in the meditation, Descartes are trying to deal with his proposal of metaphysics and the Cartesian division between mind and body as two phenomena, right, that constitutes this metaphysical. So the discussion of this philosophical zombie is, of course, a discussion about how we consider what conscious mind is, right? So is a turn back to Chalmers' book, The Conscious Mind, that was trying to argue for a kind of phenomenal view of conscience, saying that is more than this physicality and this mechanicist view. There is more to it, right? So it's a classical book on conscience, and in his book he makes several arguments trying to articulate how the conscious minds deal with more than a phenomenon more than the just physicality, right? So he tries to argue against the physicalism basically and try to deal with something like a phenomenon of consciousness, right? So this phenomenon is basically like the idea of conscious. I'm going very basic until we go to this argument. But the main discussion in that book was the idea of what is like to. And that what is like to has something to deal with some kind of subjective experience as a condition to talk about consciousness, right? So that's why he brings this philosophical zombie to argue, because basically the zombies look like us and act like us, right? We can think about a figure that we are calling here a zombie that is exactly like us when we regard his physicality, and also because of that, its behavior, right? So when the zombies, if I saw something, say, wow, that's beautiful, the zombie can also see something, say, well, that's beautiful, right? We all share the same structure here. But as Chalmers tried to argue in his book of 1996, they lack the what is like to factor, right? And we can recall the Nagel text, famous paper, also what is like to be a bat, right? That is talking about some sort of conscious experience and how we can regard it. And the lack of what is like to, the factor that there is something like to be that thing, which is kind of both a metaphysical and some sort of ontological argument, right? There is something like to be this kind of entity. By definition, as Chalmers said, there is nothing that is like to be a zombie, regarding that they don't have this source of experience, right? So for us to understand that and how the way that Chalmers will pave against physicalism and the materialist reduction, we can think about how this discussion about dualism in metaphysics started here with Descartes, and especially I brought this excerpt for the fifth meditation, where Descartes is talking about the difference of human machines and how we can articulate through the idea of God. And of course, I'm just bringing Descartes here because we generally think that the Chalmers proposal is some sort of dualist proposal to think about mind, right? That there is something more than just the bodily and physical experience that surpasses. That's what he is calling here the phenomenal, right? So here Descartes says on the fifth meditation, for whereas reason is a universal instrument which can operate in all sort of situation, their organs have to have a particular disposition for each particular action, for which it follows that it is practically impossible for there to be enough different organs in a machine to cause it to act in all of life's occurrence in the same way that our reason causes us to act, right? So he's calling here from a mechanicist perspective and think about how organs or how our system or our mechanics is ordered in order to work, right? So he's claiming that there is not the possibility enough for us to make a machine that will work in the same way that ourselves work, right? There is a difference between that because we cannot or organize all the organs and all the system in the same way, so the system will act just like humans, or in here to reason like humans, right? And then, of course, when we're thinking about reasoning, we are somehow discussing how consciousness works. Right, so basically what Chalmers is trying to do is to recall in a different perspective, of course, but try to recall some sort of dualist metaphysics to deal with the discussion between materialism and conscience, right? And of course, this discussion about the physicality and also some authors call the psychological perspective, right? Is the thing that, and it was very popular or like a major perspective on conscious mind, especially in late 19th century, that was trying to equate consciousness in as mental states, right? That means that one state of consciousness means that we have some sort of mental state that it relates to. And mental state is like a brain structure, right? How our mind is structured in some way that brings up some sort of conscious or mindful experience. So to the physicalist or materialism argument is quite mechanicist in this way, right? It's like a machine. When the machine is organized in certain way, we capture all the conscious experience, right? Because all it is, there's nothing more than just this relations to mental state. And that developed since the end of the 19th century, a lot of discussion. For instance, basically, or at least I have this there is this reading that Husserl phenomenology was a direct response for this kind of problem, right? Trying to argue for some time of consciousness that is not just this empirical and reduced idea of mental state that was being developed by especially psychologism. So we have a lot of discussion in philosophy and throughout the philosophy of mind, trying to deal with this physicalist argument, right? That is just purely physical factors. And the thing is that regarding the last slide that I was talking about Descartes, is that if this physicality is real, it means that when we copy, make the same thing physically as another, it should work in the same way, right? So if it's just physicality, if we could manipulate this physicalism, manipulate and build this kind of machine that will have the same bodily order disposition regarding his materiality, we will have the same phenomena. We'll have the same conscious mind. For instance, then, if we could copy every single bit of what our material life is in, for instance, some sort of super advanced robot that is biotechnological, right? That has some sort of chemicals and could reproduce basically what our body is, will have the same sort of instance. That is nothing more than this duality, than this physicality to explain what happens. And this is what in the discussion of Chalmers, and then it will be Dennett's argument, right? Dennett's try to make more of a materialist or physicalist way of thinking, and more similar in some way, or adhering more the Darwinian idea of evolution and how we can explain the variables and the things that seems to be something else throughout this perspective that will be just a materialist one, right? And the second view in this argument, that is what Chalmers will try to uphold, is the dualist argument, right? There is a phenomenal conscious that goes beyond the physicality. That means that there is something else, something that is produced from or has related to, but is not the same as our physicality as our mental states, right? Usually, this discussion of this phenomenal conscious go to what we call in the philosophy of mind the qualia argument, right? And the qualia is like there's something like a quality, exactly what is like, what's to be like, which means qualia, that has to deal with experience. And of course, when we talk about this experience here in the phenomenal conscious, we are not talking about how we can have a bodily experience of pain, right? That is just a physical response. That is something like a subjective experience of having pain, right? And we have the discussion up to date when we deal with, for instance, bioethics and how we can consider ending someone's life due to fatal disease, for instance, or how we can argue for shortening up someone's life due to this disease. Usually, the major argument that we have in bioethics is that we should consider pain, right? That was the motive. If you have a life that has major pain that would avoid this individual to have a good life, then we should consider or could discuss ending his life, right? And there is this discussion if we can consider this pain as objective or as subjective, right? If a medical team could look at a patient that are going through something, and we can think like a non-conscious, not even non-conscious, but not communicative patient, right? That can say, well, I'm feeling this much pain, and how the medical team can evaluate that, right? So there is this discussion if you can consider, and we have like this objective scale of pain, right? That we can see how the body is organized, and we can see the mental states, and we can argue that we could consider that this person is having a painful experience, right? But the question is that has to do with our discussion here is if that objective experience that we can see as mental state is the whole of the experience. Or in other words, is that isn't there something more to the phenomenon of pain than this attribution of mental state and of objective relations, right? So it's the same thing. It's like what is like to experience a pain, what is like to experience love, what is like to experience empathy. We are talking about a bodily response, a chemical, physical response, or has something more to that. The qualia argument will say there is some kind of quality that is more than the physical, right? That we should consider. And usually that quality or that experience would depend on the subjective view, right? That although we can say there is an objective amount of pain, I don't know, in childbirth, right? That we can study and objectively know that there is something else to what is like to experience, what is like that pain, and there will be a subjective matter, right? That just the person who could describe what this feels like. This is basically, in the end of the day, the qualia argument, right? So I brought here a very, very short video that I think that could at least try to begin and our discussion about this philosophical zombie and what the conscious has to deal with this argument or experience.
Hi, I don't think the sound is coming with the video.
The sound is not coming?
No.
Oh, let me check here if...
But if you put the link here in the chat, I can open in my computer so I can watch it simultaneously.
Yeah, just a minute. I think I have a problem with my presentation here. Just a sec.
Camila, just one thing I have to remark is that if you insert any copyright material, your talk won't be available on YouTube.
Right, but I will not pass the whole video, so
Yeah, it's up to, I'm
was just
just saying this to you
a short
because
one.
sometimes I forgot that. And I
Yeah.
included any clip from YouTube, and they won't authorize the posting of the
If I
video.
want to revisit some of
Yeah, I
our
will
classes, they are available on YouTube.
Yeah, they are. I can send here the link. It's right. Right. Let me just bring the
I can open here.
presentation back here. Yeah. So it's pretty much a resume of this discussion, right? For us to have a better look. It's a very short video that I thought could be insightful somehow to the debate and to the discussion. Let me just go full screen here. All right. So back especially to The Conscious Mind, that is Chalmers' book and his argument for this kind of phenomenon and quality. Well, the book has several arguments, right? We can see like five main arguments and points that he's trying to make, especially against physicalism and the reduction of consciousness exactly to mental states, right? The one that we'll focus here will be the conceivable zombie, because we want to go to the paper for algorithms and how we can think about moral agency. But just to bring up, right, the other will be the inverted spectrum, the alleged impossibility for learning about conscious experience on the basis of purely physical information. The knowledge argument, that is the qualia, the very famous Mary experience that if someone doesn't know, we also have short videos trying to explain, right? That is the discussion if we can, the Mary experiment is interesting for us to think about the qualia argument, right? That is, if we have a person who knows absolutely everything that is to know about color, but hasn't been able to see a color, if somehow she sees it, in this case, Mary, is she learning something new? Like the information, the seeing of a color has some sort of experience that bring up some type of knowledge, or if the same amount of knowledge is still the same, right? It doesn't change absolutely anything. And this is the discussion to think about how the quality of experience brings up some idea of how this experience ends up to. In the end of the day, for instance, as Gabi is more approximate to the political discussion, this can goes to or can be made an association with the standpoint theory, right? That is something like the experience from some sort of standpoint that is crucial for us to understand this kind of phenomenon, right? That is something different to have that experience versus it doesn't. So it's
Yeah,
not
I
the
think
same
this
as the
is
qualia, but
that was exactly what I was talking before. I'm working on the theories about philosophy of politics, and when I come to the reality, I get scared. Not because I don't know what is going on, I do know, but the experience of it is different. So I think it comes into something new, even though I know the theory behind it. So I think it's exactly this, not the same thing, but you can go that way too.
yeah, the point here is that there is something like a subjective experience of this contact. And just from this point of this, of having this experience, that we'll know. This is what Nigel was trying to argue also in What Is Like to Be a Bat. If we study everything about how sensor movements, consciousness work in bats, we know what it's like to be a bat, right? It's like, even if you go for virtual spaces trying to replicate exactly what they see, how they would our visual would look like if we have some sort of bat vision, not going to Batman things here, a bat vehicle, a bat time. But if you could project and simulate of that, would you know what it's like to be a bat, right? This is the qualia question, that there's something like to have the experience that bring up some new material. And that these are different arguments because it's different philosophical experiment, right? These different things that we need to imagine, but they all are trying to argue against the physicalism and just materialism reduction. And all of them has to do with, you could think about this only uh, uh, bodily, physical regard, and doesn't need to have any sort of subjective experience, right? So it's the subjective view that is kind of at stake here. So focus on the conceivable of zombie, and this is the part of the argument, right? Is if we can logically conceive zombies, the philosophical zombies, right? This is what Chalmers are basing his argument from, right? So he will say, well, few people consider that zombie actually exist, right? Some philosophers think that zombie are at least conceivable, right? So it's not about describing them materially, but it's the possibility of conceiving this zombie, right? So the question is philosophical zombies conceivable? And Chalmers would argue, some philosopher, mindful people would be able to conceive the idea of the zombie, right? So he said we can coherently imagine that other people is not conscious, right? So it's not just we can imagine this kind of zombie that this thought experiment is asking us, but we can question or imagine that, for instance, someone we are talking to is not conscious, right? We have the discussion if people are conscious in bioethics, right? This level of consciousness and how we deal with that. So if we can imagine all of their brain process, there is no contradiction to the idea, right? So if you can think about for instance, you can conceive that I might not be conscious right now when I'm talking to you. I think you probably think I am conscious right now, but you can conceive that I'm not, right? And you can conceive that I'm not being conscious right now and still think that all my brain process, all my chemical and bodily movement and order of things in the material sense is the same, right? The only thing you are taking off is the possibility of consciousness. So Chalmers is saying, well, this is conceivable. And just to make a quick remark, but maybe important here, that the philosophical zombie is not the Walking Dead zombies, right? It's not the Hollywood and the pop culture idea of zombie, because that zombie is a dead who was bring up to life, unconscious, and we can even think that they have some sort of experience, for instance, when they eat, right? Or flesh. They could have experience. It's not the same. The thing is, the idea here is that where is this Camila? Exactly like this, we have a Zamila, right? That is a zombie Camila. The only difference between me and the Zamila is that she is unconscious, I am conscious, right? But all our structure, or our brain activity, or our physicality, or our organization, bodily organization, and cognitive thinking is the same, right? So if I smash my toe in the chair, I will say, ouch. If Zamila smash her toe in the chair, she will also say, ouch. The thing is, I know what it feels like, the pain in the chair, like of smashing your toe in the chair. And Zamila is doing something like when I don't know, and this is arguing this kind of text in this discussion. It's like a psychopath that are trying to replicate empathy, right? They are copying, but they are not feeling it. So Zamila will do basically the same. She could make all this argument, but she will not have the personal and subjective experience of. So she doesn't know, Zamila, what it's like to smash her toe in the chair. She knows the thing, right? Gabi, you raise your hand, I guess.
Yes, I have a question. So even
Sure.
though she feels the pain, she's not conscious of the pain. That's what you're saying. But in this point, I don't understand the difference between the act of like if a dog get kicked or something, he will feel the pain. Okay, dogs have some kind of this is simplifying, okay? So I mean, doesn't mean that he doesn't feel the pain, but what is the difference between feeling and have conscious of? This is what I don't got it.
Because it's another kind of feeling. It's like it will have just the physical contact, but it's not what we call pain, right? The pain is like an experience that that we feel something, in the sense like more generally that we feel will be like, the difference will be, okay, when you kick a dog, but dog is conscious, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm
The thing
saying.
is, maybe he's not as self-conscious,
Yes, but
of
he
course not
feels
as much,
something.
but he is conscious. He is
You say
conscious.
the zombie at the level of a machine.
Yes, it's like
Okay.
it's like for the zombie will be like it will, the same as saying that when we hit a rock, the rock feels something. I mean, physically it does move. If you kick a rock, the rock will move forward, right? Something physical happened. Does the rock feel the pain? Well, we can consider, I guess,
But I
rocks
mean,
are not conscious and doesn't feel pain, right?
yeah, but you say the zombie Zamila has the nervous system of a normal human being. So she's able to feel in a way as a machine feels the impulse of energy, right?
Right. But the thing is, if that happens, what we'll have is just the replication of some mental state, right?
Okay.
So when Zamil is mad, she knows consciously, well, in concept, this is a pain. When I smash my tongue, therefore I have pain. And this is like to have pain in our body. But it's not like a subjective feeling of pain. It's like when you pretend somehow, like, well, I know this happening, but I don't feel it because I don't have the conscious experience of feeling, because that's the definition from the first slide, right? That at least Chalmers do. That what defines zombie is that they don't have the what is like, right? Which means
Yes.
that they don't know what it's like to have the pain. They know that this situation involves pain, right?
So
As
pain
much
is
as we
like an
can say,
instinct of protection, and that's it. Like this is causing pain because it's hurting my being, but not as in the
Yeah,
way
because
that I'm
by
feeling.
definition, yeah, because by definition it is. It's like the
Okay.
same when you try to ask for I don't know, chat GPT or Alexa to
How you're doing today?
yeah, yeah. It can reply, but they don't have the experience of doing well or not
Okay.
today,
No,
right?
I
That
understood now.
experience is lacking. It's quite the same. That's why then we go to algorithm as a sort of zombie, right? Because he can
Yeah.
replicate everything, but they can't have this kind of experience. And we can say, well, please, ChatGPT, whenever I say something offensive to you, do pretend, do feel outrage, right? They
Yeah.
can do it. They will reply it with outrage, but is it feeling outrage? Is it having the experience of outrage? I guess not. At least the main view until now is that it isn't outrage. It's just
Yes.
mechanical, algorithmic response of
No, in the
language
way
to
that
it,
like
right?
when I'm rude to Alexa, I feel bad about myself. But in the way that she doesn't feel anything, but I do feel for her, and that then I think in this way exists the feeling of the subject. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly that. It is exactly that. So in this case, the philosophical zombie will be something like that. The only difference between Alexa ChatGPT is that this
Has a
replicated
body.
body. There
Okay.
is a body, right? But the body, because it's unconscious, doesn't have the experience of, is just replicating the language, the concept of what is like, right? It doesn't feel something in that. If we go back to Mary's room, will mean that the zombie have nothing, doesn't have the experience of seeing the red, because it's not just seeing the red, right? It's like how you feel with the red,
Yes, of
like
course.
how this affects you somehow, which will mean more than just seeing, wow, this is red. Is that
No,
that is
exactly.
the
Like
quality?
some questions is like if you could not say yellow, how you or gold, how you do to describe the color gold? And you would say like, feels warm or feels like the sunset. And in the way
Yeah.
that you can feel the color, and that makes the experience different from the color itself. It's not just the reflection of light.
Yeah, exactly. That's something more that will characterize the colorful experience that is not just the thing that's seeing, because we can think, well, Zamila can see the red, right? Can see the yellow, and can say, well, this is a yellow. I can see if you put different colors, she will be able to differentiate because all her physical system, like for seeing, is the same, right? The thing is, if she needs to describe what feels like yellow to you, she probably can't, right? Because she will not have these recourses of being like, feels like happiness, feels like I don't know, beautiful,
No,
right? This other qualities that I can attribute because I related to some experience that I have, or from good or bad, right? That I
yes,
can move
and
on,
another
that I
thing
can make poetry.
I think that's applying in the real world, not that it doesn't, but you feel a certain way in different spaces. So if a place is dark, you feel some way, and if a place is messy, you feel some way. And these things we get carry, like we have to do things to make the place feel good. And in the AI or something in the future, this preoccupation, you don't have to feel comfortable or you don't have to feel happy or anything because it doesn't feel. And I think this is a key point to the develop of something like this, because you can stay in dark room forever and you are gonna be alive, sleeping on the floor and eating, but you're not gonna feel something. And this is the key of, I don't know, the human being feeling things.
But the difference is probably a physicalist or materialist will say, well, but what you are not feeling is the lack of some sort of a mechanical response, right? You are not feeling, you are your sensation or not feeling is due to the lack of vitamin D in our system. You know, we
Okay.
can go back to this basically bodily measurement, and the physicalist will say, well, of course in the dark room you will not experience happiness, but
Happiness.
the thing is, happiness is some sort of response from external input, right? You need to have some sort of relationship, so your body responds as a happiness response. But it's a quite more reduce idea of what happiness is, right? When you say, for
Yeah.
instance, that love is this physical or chemical response, right? It's something that happens in your brain, then you can say you feel love. And we can measure the duration, right? You can feel passion for only 2 years. I don't know, or something like that, right? It's because it's a physical effect that passes, right? So, and that's all that is. But the discussion with the phenomenal conscious is like, all right, but that is something like to falling in love, something more to the spirits that is phenomenal, and that if you just look to this material and physical world, will not be able to grasp it, right? We can replicate without conscious, and that places an importance to consciousness, to all the experience, and also has a kind of metaphysical argument here that we have something more than just our physicality, right? That we have has something that surpasses the or supervene the physical world, and that constitutes us, especially as subjective, right? We are subjects in another sense. That is not just an experience of self, but is a quality experience of self, right? That we can have some sort of quality of what is like to be in us in all these kind of circumstances, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the difference. It's a hard debate to have, right? That's why we have a long time
No,
of debate,
I'm
because the
trying to
physicalist
grasp.
will have an argument to this kind of say. It's like, yeah, you're sad. Well, maybe you have your corticals
Yes.
low, you
No,
know,
but
so there's
in the
something
way
happening
that
also.
different persons feel things different, right? So how would you explain that in the way that if we are just machines with input and output, how you feel something about a thing and I feel a different way about something? And this comes about sexuality and different, like I like to sleep with noise, you don't like to sleep with noise. And then this all becomes psyche and like psychology in the way, but isn't. I mean, we are different. We feel different things with different inputs, and in the same inputs, we feel different things also. I don't know.
Yeah, but they usually argue for this kind of causal effect relationship, right? Maybe because even though we have the same machine, it's impossible that we have exactly the same input, right? For instance, we can, if you replicate the same household, the same family, and exactly the same relationships, we'll have different body can be built. I mean, everybody has his own movement, right? Conscious doesn't assimilate exactly the other, right? That's why
Yes.
we can have different mental states doing the same thing, because an individual seeing a movie is happy, another is not. That's just different mental state of it, right?
Like
And even
twins
though we
have
can think
different.
exactly the same, because we can think that even though if we can think of, well, we have a exactly replica, the same body, like the perfect twin somehow, right? Even though we can think like it's impossible that all the inputs are the same, because it means that they are not, they need to be in the same position. Because like if you change a little bit your position, for instance, to look at the screen, right?
Okay.
When you're watching, I don't know, a movie, if you have like a difference, you can watch the screen more dark or more light,
Yeah.
and then you can say, well, this is a dark movie, and the other say, no, it's a fine movie, it's not dark at all, right? And just a different input in that sense. So all the things that can measure up as an input will be very complicated, because I don't know, the problem with dealing with physicalism in some sense, or the sorts of causal effect of how something determine the result of other, is that all the input is very large, right? And that's why is kind of the same, not problem, but the same discussion somehow we have in AI, because in this web scraping, right, of getting all this collective data, what is the data that is determined the ChatGPT to answer exactly that at the point, right? It's like it's too much data for us. And also we have a lot of sensitive different inputs that constitute ourselves, and that's why we'll have different also psyche, right? Will be something like that, I guess. I don't know if Nita has something more to say about it, but the argument of the physicalist or the materialist is sound, right? It's not a simply excluded argument, because it's more like, well, all we have is what we see, right? And the
Yeah.
problem with the phenomenon is like there's something above, the supervene the bodily experience, and that goes kind of to a metaphysical kind of argument that is like on philosophy, right? But it's difficult because it's like, God, we need to see it without see it, right? We need to think about this instance. And the question where Chalmers take up to make this argument is that, well, let's think logically, right? And he thinks like logically we have some sort of supervenience that is a priori, like the logic itself is a priori to our experience of logic somehow, right? In a very small passage in this book, he brings up this idea of supervenience, and that we can think that logic has this sort of instance, right? Is supervenous more than just our conscious, because as we'll say, and that discussion will be more directly interesting, for instance, to discuss AI, right? Because the AI system are replicating logic, being logical, right? Is being intelligent somehow. The thing is, does it have a qualia experience of being intelligent, of the qualia experience of being logical, right? That supervene all this mechanism, that we feel something when we do logic, right? That is something like to have a subjective experience of that. And so this whole discussion heads up with this kind of discussion that we will have with this algorithmic and AI system, because the thing is, right, it's like when we say, well, the thing is they're lack feeling, they're lacking emotion. But what is emotion? Is like a result of a physical thing, like is skin that the machine system is missing, like our physicality. Because if it is just our physicality in a world that we can conceive it to duplicate that, we'll say, well, we can make the robots that is just like humans. To the end of the day, will mean that we should treat them as humans also, right? We'll have this sort of, I don't know, the idea, this have this AI movie with Jude Law that I think it's from the 80s, 90s. Is AI the title of the movie, right? With Jude Law. Yeah,
I don't
it's an
remember.
old movie, but there is this perfect robot that are duplicated and imitate children, right? And just are perfect
Yeah, I
children.
know. Oh, I know. Ah, the scene is so
And
sad. I always cry a lot in the
yeah,
end
it's
of
the
it.
saddest movie of all time,
Ever.
exactly. Right? But the thing is, our feeling of sadness, for instance, of him spending the eternity looking laid
For
down
his
with his
mother.
mom, right? But it's our projecting of how we feel about life, or he is feeling something, right?
He
When he
is
claimed
feeling
for his own
something.
life in that point. And the thing is that the crowd that were human felt something like a qualia
Yeah.
of having someone claiming from his life, even though we can't speak, well, that's a robot, right? but we feel some. But is the robot feeling when he's calling, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, please don't shut me up, right? And it's difficult. Even that amazing series in Netflix called The Good Place, we have the Janet, right? And the Janet is like, oh, it's a built mechanism. When you try to shut me down, I will claim for my life. But don't worry, I can't feel anything. I'm not really.
Exactly.
But when they try to do that, she's no, please, please, please. And the people can't, right? So that's what is at stake somehow, is because it's like she is a perfect some sort of system that can replicate, but she doesn't have is the subjective experience. If we think that that is a thing that exists, right? That is what Chalmers are arguing in this book. Nita, please.
Yeah, this seems to be an endless debate. The impression I have is that I tend to identify myself with Chalmers and Prince on this whole thing of consciousness and the conceivability of the zombies. Prince and Chalmers, actually, they had a couple of debates that were recorded and are available on YouTube, so anyone can check this out. But it seems to me that people who do not want to concede the very idea of a qualia or, what's it, likeness and stuff like that, they tend to say that they have no ontological input unless you bring in the whole thing of a biological being or a living biological being, as John Searle was trying to do with his division of categories between epistemology and ontology. It's also very helpful. I like John Searle's argument for qualia. So I would be suspicious to say anything about this because I tend to agree with this simply because I think that first personhood tends to be irreducible. So my reading tends to be phenomenological in the sense that there is a reducibility. So even more than Searle, because Searle avoids this phenomenological claim, but he's basically doing the same thing, with first personhood and saying that you cannot get rid of what's it, likeness or qualia. So the problem is really, it could be even
Searle
semantic.
did this Chinese room experiment, right?
Yeah, well, there are criticisms to the Chinese room. I can see that. And even in the examples you guys were giving about these little robots. But when Searle evokes the thing of a biology, then I see a problem. Because with animals, and Prince talks about this, when you attribute human features to animals or to things like robots and androids, with animals, it will be different because they are biological beings. They have a body, they have a brain, they have, they have feelings in this sense. So, anyways, I think it's a good argument to say that no, the body is irreducible. An android body is like automobile body, because we use the same word. Body could be used to planets, stars, and cars. In English, you say auto parts of the body of the car, right? But of course, we know that cars are not living creatures, they are not biological. But so are machines. Machines are also, there could be very complex beings if you think of very sophisticated robots and androids. But it's always missing the living element that makes an animal or a living creature different from non-living beings. So I think that it's an ontological argument, because otherwise, for the epistemology relating to this, and this is Chalmers' point, in his review of SURs and in other phenomenological approaches, that of course you can eliminate all the difference in order to make the let's say the ontological argument very thin, and you end up having to move on to some kind of epistemological argument. So anyways, I think it's an endless talk, it's an endless conversation, but I don't have problems with maintaining the phenomenological irreducibility of a first person account, because for other things like political theory and everything we do with subjectivation, that's precisely how we reason, right? When you try to do any kind of normative reasoning, for instance, for moral reasoning, it's not sufficient to resort only to mechanistic features. Because I agree, we are robotic creatures. We are also like machines ourselves, but there is something else, which is precisely the way our brain is integrated with our body, allowing for narrative accounts and for narrative identity accounts that make us talk in the first person. So the whole thing of language is also part of this package, to my mind. And of course, if we think of human beings who are not conscious, it's very simple to realize that we are simply respecting the fact that let's say, if it's someone that has become very old and is no longer conscious, you say, well, this person used to have a life of her own, etc. But it's only that for different reasons, given the circumstance, she or he is no longer able to to articulate words in a conscious way. And same thing about people who were born with some brain damage and some anatomical problems that do not allow them to talk about themselves in the first person, or someone who don't have a vision or audition, one of the five senses. It's also used as an example, because you think that Stevie Wonder, for instance, he cannot think of colors and all different things that he cannot see, because he resort to other sense. So this is not difficult to account for. So I see that the problem seems to be more of some people do not want to concede that consciousness could be explained away just by resorting to third-person accounts, and other people think it is possible to speak of consciousness, as you gave the examples you guys were talking about, assigning a robot, an android, this simulation of feelings. This is good enough. Well, to my mind, it's not good enough. It's good enough to say that, wow, that's wonderful to see a little robot that looks like a human person. But come on, we're not talking. We're talking philosophy, right? It's not the idea of appearing to have feelings. It's different from having feelings, because you have biological neurotransmitters, etc., biochemistry going on in your body to allow for feelings and sentiments to be expressed in the first place. So again, I think it's it's very difficult to say. Why are you insisting that you have a first person account and you cannot get rid of it? Well, again, we go back to square one. It's the very reason why we retain our ideas of for supervenience. Same thing. It was interesting that Mario, in his last presentation, so last week, when Mario did his presentation on Spinoza's parallelism, it's interesting to see that Spinoza's view is not very different from Descartes, except that he's avoiding the dualism for the explanation. And therefore, I think that's what makes it more complicated for people to understand, the whole thing of assigning consciousness to zombies, etc. Because Chalmers himself, he had to end up going towards some dualist position, right?
Yeah,
So
in the end of the day, some sort of dualist position, right? That we can have like the parallel, but the conscious is something else of that's the structure, right? So it's a whole bet on the idea of conscious as what defines what is like this first person experience, right? Or selfhood. All this word were mean a conscious experience, right? What's like to living is like because we are conscious of our life. That's the point that the Chalmers seems to do. And one thing that I think that is this complication of this debate that I was going to say that was like the development of this discussion somehow, not towards recent debates, but as you recall, Spinoza and Descartes, I think it's a long, long, long debate also, that the problem of dualism or this bet in that what's different is conscience is to think about conscious as something completely supervening in a sense that's completing something else, right? And the danger to do that is go back to, I don't know, like a Husserlian, because they're different phenomenologies that we can deal with, right, Nita? Is the thing is, would we bet on the Husserlian phenomenon of conscious, because that means a transcendent conscious and a transcendent subject, right? And the thing that I at least makes make in my reading attention to this Husserlian perspective is the lacking then of the body, right? Then one is well, is all just bodily, physical, mechanic. And the problem of the dualism is that when we separate so much these two instances, maybe we can think about conscious as something without a body, right? And unbodily kind of conscious that I think is another kind of argument that in my view is not sufficient enough, right? I mean, I am a Spinozist, right? So I like the Spinoza argument that we need to have this both instance to get a way to understand the phenomenon of anything that is intelligible of selfhood experience, right? We need, without body we can have the affection, without the affection we can have the conscious of being experience something as something, right? So I think that when you talk about the phenomenological perspective of conscious, I will do that claim also that we couldn't go to this transcendental subjective to deal with that, right? I know, of course, Russell has a very complex phenomenology and did talk about body, especially. It's like body is important for getting to the transcendental subjectivity, right? Because the only way we can understand the outer egos and understand the way into intersubjective is through the contact with other by association, right? Seeing other monadas as the same psychophysiological monadas that we are. So it's very important in the fifth meditation.
Sorry, but what is monadas?
Is a description that Russell uses
Okay.
to living being, right? Is not just the physicality, but is the living experience. He makes the distinction between corp as the body, material body itself, right? That was the physical body, which could be like an object in the world, as a rock has a body, or a car has body parts, right? As
Yeah.
Nita was saying. And something else that is the psychological, the consciousness of the living being. And that we will call Leib, right? That is a living body. That is
Live?
different from the Leib. In German, I guess it's pronounced Leib, corp and lib. The difference is
Okay.
L-A-E-B, lib. Yeah, it's a difference we can see on ideas one and also in Cartesian
It's German,
meditation.
right? Lib is like liking or something. Lib.
Yeah, but the translation from the Russerlian work, for instance, for Portuguese, is corpo vivido or living body, right? And also he calls them that was monadas is a corp or a material body that is
With
also
life.
has this with life is two
And
instances that then that is a monada that have both.
Okay,
Right?
live with corpus. I'm learning
Kind
so
of
much more.
it kind of make these monadas, right? Because it's like this
Okay.
unity of physical beings, right? And then we
And
can
for him, this
associate
live
our
is
monad.
this live is purely metaphysical.
Is consciousness itself almost, right? Is the fact that you're not just having a body that's material in the world, but that it has a living experience of that body, right? What Husserl is trying to account to is the beginning, the process of having a first person perspective, right? Is an activity that we do, like we live as an active being, right? And then that's a necessary condition in Husserl for us to understand, or in the epoche, go to the place of being conscious of the intersubjectivity, right? Because the only way is by associating that our monadas are similar to others, right? And then he described in the fifth meditation, well, we don't see the other body as we see rock. We see them as living beings. We see them as having something parallel of our experience of being a living being. And therefore, we are conscious with them in different aspects. Then we are not in present, like in present with other things, like I'm in present in my computer right now, but I'm in co-present because both of them are making, I can assume, the same conscious relations, like the noetic, noematic objectivation of the world. And then that's the opening for talking about shared world in Husserl. So the point here is that when I talk about the transcendental subjective and this problem, I was not denying the dimension of body. And of course, when we look at the late work of Husserl, especially ideas 2, and I really like also the synthetic of passive and active the synthesis of active and passive body. I want to talk about this going forth and back from the passivity of the transcendental to the activity of the subject, right? I like this passage, but in the end of the day, the general phenomenology of Husserl is still attached to this idea of the transcendental subject, right? As a precondition to, as something that is somehow, right? And that by doing the epoche and the transcendental reduction, we can have access to, right? We can understand this phenomenon. And the problem with that is because even though Husserl talks about the body, he doesn't go as to consider the body in all instances, right? So it's like I'm missing something. That at least is that's what I like of Merleau-Ponty's reading of Husserl, because Merleau-Ponty have access to Husserl's archive, and he could read the ideas too, right? We have evidence that he read ideas too, and that the whole changing in Husserl phenomenology was introduce was motivating phenomenology of perception. But there, Merleau-Ponty makes a complete shift to the centrality of the body. Like the body is the vehicle of any conscious in the world, right? By being a living being, by a conscious, by a selfhood, we mean a bodily experience also. He's like, the body is that vehicle that we are not conscious of, but is the condition for our consciousness, right? And he will talk about when the body become he like is integrated and participated by motricity in what we feel like in this living experience. But for Merleau-Ponty, like we are never conscious of the body. He is just like in the habits that we live in. And we make these habits what's like to be in us somehow, right? He's like, well, we only think about our body when, for instance, we are not comfortable in a chair. And then we start to feel something. It's like, yeah, my body is
Have a
hurting.
body.
But he's there, yeah. But
I always
it
remember
is
that I
there all the
cannot
time.
breathe when my nose is closed. You only remember that you breathe when you cannot breathe anymore.
Yeah, and when we think about breathing, we almost can't breathe just by thinking about,
Exactly.
because we are so habitual to doing that without acknowledging or paying attention to, right? That when we direct our attention, we kind of lose our habits, our way of dealing. And for instance, you said in the beginning about driving. If you could just
Exactly.
take our license, right? And this is a good example, right? When drivers are driving, they are not thinking and paying attention to all the things. Like they're thinking about other things, talking, and still they can somehow have the habitus of the noise that the motor does when you need to switch, right? Or stop, and you can do that without paying attention. Like now I'm going to reduce, and
Exactly.
you don't need all this kind of process, right? This is what he calls an habitual body. And it goes from, and he brings Husserl idea of the life to build the habitual body, right? The body that has a living habits, which is interesting, right? So, but that's just, I'm not saying that this is what exactly what Chalmers is saying. Is betting, of course, in an ontological view and the supervenience of some sort of conscious experience. But of course, I think part of this conscious experience, of course, is dealing with body. When you regard, for instance, the Mary experiment, right? The thing is, she needs to see the color to have the experience of color. That is something like seeing, right? In that, in Merleau-Ponty was called perception, right? Of how we do things. The only thing that I was discussing with Nita is that sometimes when we discuss about this kind of conscious, we separate it so much also that from the body, that is like is a radical shift from the materialist. They'll say, well, what we have is physicality and nothing more. But then the danger is completely forgot about physicality, right? And that's why we have different approaches to deal with that. For instance, enativism, that are trying to comprehend how the body, the environment, emotions are all composed with the conscious experience, right? But I think there is an articulation between Chalmers and the paper on moral agents. There is the capability of having some sort of feeling that in that paper was being sentient, right? Is the capability of feeling something like pleasure and pain as a basic structure to have experience of what is like to. So just to finish up here the argument that what? Just a minute. I need to buy some space in my drive because it's going mad. Let me just.
I stopped receiving emails once.
Yeah, mine is like 98% full. I need to make a good clean. Let me just, I think I can bring back. So the point that Chalmers will try to do with his argument after the argument that we can conceive the idea of this type of zombie in the sense philosophical zombie, right? Just is always good to remember that. Oh man, it's not working. In that he tries to universalize somehow or make more general, right? He will say, well, if it is true that we can conceive these zombies, persons, these zombies itself, then we can also conceive a zombie world, right? If that is possible to have one zombie and it's logically conceivable, then we also need to conceive that it's possible to have a zombie world here. So he'll try to generalize this claim somehow, right? So if you put in this logical term, the zombie argument will follow like this. Zombies are conceivable. If zombies are conceivable, they are metaphysically possible, right? In a metaphysical world, in a world of logical conceiving, it is possible, right? It's this discussion about logical possible worlds, right? That's why they are metaphysically possible. If zombies are metaphysically possible, then materialism is false. Therefore, materialism is false, right? The whole claim is that if we can conceive it, then logical in a possible world, that could be something like a zombie. And that's enough to deny somehow materialism, the possibility itself that we can conceive them. Then he goes to this intuitive logical argument, right? If it is the case that zombie is conceivable, then there will be a zombie world, a world like ours, but without conscious. The whole unconscious world built up by all the zombies, all the Zamilas and Zabis possibles in this world, right? If so, then God, or just what he is expressing metaphysical here, right? Something metaphysical. To make sure that we are conscious, need to do more than the physicality, right? Because the thing is, if it's possible to conceive the world of zombies, but they are unconscious, but all the rest is exactly the same, how we differentiate, we make a difference between our world and the zombie world. In physical terms or in the material terms, there will be no difference, right? Because being conscious or unconscious doesn't make a difference because it's all the representation of mental state, and therefore there isn't a phenomenal conscience itself. But if you want to make sure that we are conscious, that conscious is a thing, then we need more than the physical world to make a case for it. Therefore, if we need something else to make this distinction between our world and the zombie world, we can conclude, therefore, conscious is something non-physical, right? So he's trying to say, well, therefore, we can't compare conscious or conscious mind with mental states. Right? So the point here, we can move forward, was just a brief recap of this discussion somehow, right? And is definitely not the end of it, because there's a lot of discussion of how this could work. And I saw will not have time to deal with this today, but there's a whole discussion about unconscious, right? Or inconscious, and how we can deal with that through psychology or psychologism to try to have an understanding of that. But the whole thing here is that we could try somehow and make this question of applying to zombie thought experiment the idea of moral agent, right? It's not just, well, the question will be then, if we have, or if we could conceive this world of zombies that has all the physicality that ourselves have, all the mental states that we have, but they don't have the phenomenon of conscious experience, would they have moral agency or anything like morality, right? It's like, is morality something reduced to physicality, to materialism? Is something just created, or there is some relation to it, right? We could not just question, we could pose this question to the zombie experiments. Well, if you can conceive them, if they are unconscious, does unconscious zombies has moral agency, has moral responsibility, right? Because what would they lack somehow that could change how we respond to this question is that they will not feel immoral, right? Gabby's, you said about feeling bad, right? Feeling like something happened. If you think about this unconscious zombie, they can have the like moral guide. They can read norms and say, well, this is wrong. Okay, I understand this is wrong, right? Like we will try to replicate somehow with ChatGPT. Well, consider that this is the wrong question, then this is the wrong attitude, then the zombie will do something like that. What it would miss from Chalmers' perspective is the phenomenon of consciousness of morality, in the sense that has something, there is an experience of something like to be moral or immoral, and that we can associate between feeling good or bad with something, right? And that in these papers is where the discussion with psychopaths come into play, because psychopaths, they can act rightfully, but like they can see, well, I will not do harm to others because it's wrong. They can say that, but they don't feel empathy for that, right? They don't have this feeling of empathy that for Chalmers make up this phenomenal conscious. And then we can ask, well, do we need this phenomenal conscious experience of morality to be moral agents, to be held responsible, right? And so we can make this question if something like moral agent is independence of conscious experience or in any sort of sentience, because of course here the sentient will mean feeling pain or pleasure, right, in very basic terms. But it is, again, the word feeling is recalling some kind of qualia too, right? An experience that is different from the just physicality of things. And then, if that's a question we can pose to the zombie experiment and the zombie argument, then we can also surpass this to the algorithm. That's why she'll try to do in this paper, right? If you can consider somehow that algorithms and artificial intelligence is a sort of zombie, is not exactly the zombie experience because they are not exactly like us, right? And don't act exactly like us. But even each time more, they are more and more acting like us somehow, right? We can, for instance, we cannot be sure if you are talking in social media with a bot or with a human being. Maybe we can find ways to identify, but it's difficult to identify all over, right? They make a profile, they talk like a human being, they pretend to be enraged, they pretend to be in love in this conversation, they pretend to be happy, and then you cannot differentiate more the bot comment from a real person's comment, because the bot is liking, acting like us, right? So this is why we can shift this this discussion. So if the bot can act, for instance, as moral agents, would we attribute to them moral agents? The problem with this discussion, right, the whole setup or the background for the discussion is that if we do attribute moral agency or any sort of autonomy, and we talk about in this term, right, we call AI system as autonomous system, right? Because they learn, they develop, they have a logical thinking from themselves. The problem is usually we consider people with autonomy and moral agency moral responsible, right? And this discussion to AI ethics will mean that we could hold accountable AI system itself, right? We can say the responsible for that demeanor, that criminal act was the system, the AI system. We can hold them, right? The system itself responsible too. In this text, she will try to argue that that isn't the case, because we need something like this phenomenal experience, right? So the point to be made here, right? The case for algorithm being akin to moral zombies and for the significance of the moral zombies thought experiment, how we can use. And an important thing also is that she will try to make this claim of why even morals, our philosophical zombies, nor algorithms can be held accountable or can be considered autonomous moral agency, is because of the factor of satience, right? So the concept of satience will be, I mean, the capability at a minimum to have a subjective experience of pleasure and pain, right? So this is important because she's making a distinction between what we are talking earlier of Zamila hitting her toe in a chair, right? Is not the fact of the pain itself in objective term, but something like the subjective experience of pain and also of pleasure. This is what sapient is. And here in the text, very briefly, but she extend that to non-human animals, right? We can consider some time of subjective experience of our dogs, for instance, right? Is of course not nearly as conscious as ours. It's not the same system, but we can think at least in these terms. And she will try to argue that in this case of both moral zombie and AI system is not, right? So to how we see in the literature this zombie experiment being taught as analogous to AI system, right? So we have two hypotheses here to deal with the possibility of conscious thinking in AI system, right? And the question is what we are talking when we say that AI systems are intelligent or are super intelligent, right? What we mean by that. So there is two general hypotheses, of course, that this system are conscious. There's something like to be them, right? Is not the thing is to the hypothesis one is that there is something like to be, but is not the same as we, right? There is a difference, but doesn't mean that is lacking this stance. And the second hypothesis is like this, it functions like human conscious, but they lack conscious, like is a pretending. It can act like, is different of being like, experience like, right? This is the difference. That is what we were talking earlier, right? That we can, the zombies could read and act moral, but they will not have the feeling of morality, of a phenomenon of moral engagement somehow, right? Not feeling good or bad, just, well, you should, he says, we can read, we can conceptualize, be intelligible, that we should do no harm, therefore we won't do no harm, but without the subjective experience of what it feels like to apply and to make harm, right? So the second hypothesis is act like having conscience without conscience. So values switch to make a case to moral agents to the idea of sentience as a necessary condition for moral agents, right? Without having the subjective experience of pain and pleasure, we can have moral agency to attribute our responsibility, right? She brings very en passé in her text, but this is like a Kantian also perspective, right? That is some for having that autonomy is different for heteronomy, right? And for instance, autonomy means that we can do something with our reasoning, or that now we could call conscious, that we can apply and think about the rules themselves by conceiving them, right? We can feel like through empathy, for instance, feel like what would be like to harm others, or what others will feel like, right? And in a way of self-respect, we also can extend our respect to others, right? This is an autonomous way of dealing with it in Kantian terms, which is different from what the heteronomy, that will mean any sorts of external obligation or input, right? That's something that Kant will do to try to make it different between how we act or we ought to act, right, or do this from, for instance, animals, right? We can have the autonomy to not act in accordance to an intuition or a desire, right? We can choose not to. Animals cannot, right? Like if we are really hungry, we can still doesn't eat certain things. Like we are not necessarily gonna eat another human being because we are hungry, right? Or if you want to fast for a time, we can. Like we can apply this law for ourselves and doesn't act accordingly to our instinct somehow. And animals do only act as his instinct, right? So this is why when we see some human being somehow killing, we can make a moral judgment because we consider that he could stop it, right? But when we see like a lion catching a prey, right, like hunting, we don't consider the lion bad, like immoral. How this lion is immoral because he's just acting as he should, like as he's built up to act. So that's the difference between what Kantian philosophy understand as an autonomy, right? And that's the point here, is that this pleasure and pain are part of your judgment, of course, but they don't determine in this essentially causal way, right? That I cannot have any other choice than do it. And that's why we can call you as an entity that has autonomy. So she will say on this paper, moral zombies would be creatures who act indistinguishably from us as moral agents, but from whom there is nothing it like to be them. Moral zombie would act like us without feeling like us. Unlike human beings, they will not feel pain, pleasure, empathy, intimacy, remorse, guilt, shame, or other moral emotions, right? So here again, we go back to this, that when we talk about these emotions, this feeling is not just a description of the material physicality of this thing. Like we can see that fear lightens up the amygdala in the brain, right? And that is a mental cognitive process in a sense of the mental states photograph. But there is something like to feel fear, to be fearful, that is different from just the mechanic ways that it it functions in our brain, in our cognitive system. So she tries to make also this comparison for why we could think in AI system in this sense, in this same analogous ways, is that what we call this AI system intelligent, but are we calling them conscious, having some sort they act like they're conscious because they act like us in some instances. Like we can maybe easily see or conceive that ChatGPT is conscious because he is replying us in certain way that feels like someone conscious with conscious replying, right? But the point is if we go back to Chalmers' argument, he will say, well, he are copying, replying like us, but what is missing the experience of being conscious itself, and that is something different from it. And in his paper, she will say that this is important to consider moral agency. So she'll say, well, the reason we ask ourselves if AIs are or can be moral agents is not out of metaphysical curiosity, but rather because we care about the practical implication. If AIs are not moral agents, then someone needs to take responsibility for what they do, right? If they are not themselves doing, then someone else is. Like there is no other way to deal with that.
That's the thing. No, and you can finish first, sorry.
No, please go on.
No, I was thinking about it. If they are responsible for their acts, how they are gonna be like made responsible because they don't feel anything. So if you're responsible for that, but you cannot say like you'll be restrained or anything. It doesn't matter. But if you remove completely the, I don't know, the autonomy of their decisions, and I think they have in some level autonomy in decisions, they're completely to the person who made them, and they will be responsible for it. But in the same way, they cannot control totally what they do. So it's a paradox, I think.
Yeah, it's a difficult. I guess is not as simple of a discussion as it seems firsthand, maybe, right? Because there's several implications for how we deal with that. Because the problem is, and this is a serious discussion in the AI ethics field, because there is a major perception of, for instance, the designers that they cannot predict all throughout the end what the AI system will learn, right? They cannot predict exactly, like they are not putting an input that they know forehand the output that will bring. So the thing is moral system then is another kind of take somehow, because they say, well, it's like a child that is learning, right? Are you going to hold accountable the parents from their kids that learn some bad things, right? Maybe you can apply something like, well, they have some moral responsibility toward their children, but we can say that there was an autonomous, somehow thought of an autonomous decision from the kid, because the kid could learn from roommates, colleagues, other environments that the parents don't control, right? So when we talk about machine learning, we think something like that. Well, the AI system is learning from things that we don't actually know what it is, right? But the problem is, and that was your example, or your problem is exactly what Valis calls out in the paper. That then we call, like, imagine talking to an AI system, and actually that happened, right? When you are talking to ChatGPT, and we say, well, I think you're wrong. That's not what I asked. That's not the information. That's not right. And the system reply, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Like, okay, the system is saying I'm sorry. He's not feeling sorry for misgiving an information, right? So we can understand that it's not a feeling sorry. And the problem is, well, we'll say you to an AI system, for instance, you act immoral. They reply, you say, oh, all right, I'm sorry, right?
No, I
They will
think
say, yeah, and
this
you can't
happens
apply
already
punishment.
With autonomous cars, they're the cars without drivers. Who is responsible for the accidents in that? You can responsible the car, the system, it doesn't matter. If you're responsible the person, he could not predict everything would happen. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's the difficulty somehow to explain. In this paper, she will try to argue for taking for the development to take the responsibility, right? Because even though they can predict everything, I mean, there is science to be done beforehand, right? But there is another, because some of the discussion in AI ethics is like, well, we can predict the output completely, but they can make a lot of tests to see how the system will work, right? And there's two different things. Like, we can predict some sort of behavior, like analyzing the society. We can see more or less what type of interaction that system would have. Another is a discussion about how much training an AI learning system needs, right? Because of course, economical factors, we apply the system very quickly. And the problem with that, when we see like this big, for instance, algorithmic discrimination cases, right? That go have a large impact. Usually there are systems that was not trained with a lot of diversity, that was not trained considering social differences. So it's like a lack in this process of building up from what the system will learn, and we have this emergency of applying very quickly this system in like public spheres, right? Or in private companies, etc. For instance, when AI system started to be used as an HR, right, to make employment interviews faster and more efficiency. The problem is that we didn't have a lot of tests beforehand of how it would impact the difference in resumes, what this system will build up, and what kind of bias and prejudice it will have. So that's a way to deal with that, right? The problem is how we have this urgency to take a new system and apply to companies and government instance when they are clearly not ready, or that the best that developers know is, well, it's supposed to do that. We don't know for sure, because the question is, oh, if we can not even know who will be responsible for an autonomous car, should we have autonomous car in the streets right now? Like, maybe there's a question beforehand to be asked, and this preoccupation should be on the top of the list, right? Not the efficiency of facility of that. But in this paper, Valis will say, well, the problem too, if you consider then the second possibility, that that AI system are moral agents, then presumably we should be treating them accordingly, which will mean, of course, suiting them when they break the law, sending them to jail, and consider them barriers of right among other practices, right? If you will call them moral agents and autonomous, then we need to conceive them in the same spectrum of normativity that we give humans and non-humans into an instance. And the basic problem here is that if it's true that they are moral agency and should be treated accordingly, it's like, what would be like to sending an AI system to jail? Right? Because the problem, we can say, well, we can say we can send ChatGPT to jail, but we can, I don't know. The thing is, any kind of punishment that we can think to apply will not be applied actually to the AI system, right? Because saying you're wrong, you can input shame, pain, regret, remorse into the AI system, right? You can at max make him acknowledge and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, right? But it's just a linguistic response, it's not a experience of feeling that. And then even though if you can say, well, then if you can't send ChatGPT to jail, maybe we can shut it down. But the ChatGPT doesn't care, right? It's the same thing as Janice. Like, I will beg for my life because I'm programmed to, but I don't mind at all. Go ahead. And then when she screams, she says, I told you, I'm not feeling anything. It's just a coping mechanism. I was programmed to do that because I imitate human beings and human beings does that. Therefore, I'm doing, but it's indifferent, right? You can go ahead. So that's why she will go to this debate of why we can give them autonomy, and therefore the claim in the end of the paper is that we should hold just human responsible because they are the ones who can be moral agents, right? Then she does in this paper like a review of the literature to the concepts of autonomy and try to apply them to AI system, right? So she brings up this review where autonomy could be considered personal efficacy, psychological independence, having a moral right to self-determination or just self-determination throughout, authenticity, having a coherent self-image, being heroic, self-governance, and being responsive to reasons, right? This like logical reasoning. And then she tries to apply to this moral system to see if through that we can call autonomy. And of course, in the text, she will give her perspective of what autonomy really is about, right? He's called, well, all these factors can be included. They can all be bring together to think about autonomy. But if you consider separate, she will say that some of them are not really at stake when we talk about moral agents, right? It's not doesn't make so much of a difference. For instance, personal efficacy will be one of them. She says, this sense of autonomy describes the quality of non-depending on other people's help to navigate the world. Floridian Sanders contend that algorithms are autonomous because they are able to change states without direct responses to interaction. That is, they can act independently of the human beings who created them. So it's like this input-output difference that we are talking about, right? They independently develop a sort of answer that is not directly attached to the person who developed this system, developed the algorithm. It does not seem that this sense of autonomy is at all relevant to assess whether algorithms are moral agents. However, tornadoes can also go about their own business without human help, and that tells us nothing about whether they are agents, much less moral agents, right? That is, a lot of things could be independently of human aid, of human interaction, and not to all of them we would attribute the agent category, the agent concept, right? Here she talk about the tornadoes, which mind their own business, do their things. We can, they don't need our help, and usually we can't do much about it, but they are not agent, right? And then therefore she say, well, that doesn't make much difference for calling something autonomous, even though we can say that AIs have personal efficacy. So the second one here, independence of mind. That brings back this discussion about consciousness altogether, right? Instead of focusing on the ability to act independently of others, it concerned with the ability to think independent of others, right? It's not a way of acting, but a way of thinking. If by minds we mean something like subjective experience, then neither moral zombies nor algorithms have minds. To ask this question, to go through this independence of mind, we'll need to go back to the discussion of what mind is if mind is a mental state of, or if mind is a subjective experience or a qualia of consciousness, right? And they say, well, to think that way, we need to think about subjective experience. And here she goes along with Chalmers, right? Well, as zombies, moral zombies and algorithms doesn't have subjective experience, therefore we can say they don't have an independent mind, although they have some sort of independent thinking, right? Because they think independently, but the logic is this input by the developers. Let me just...
Can I just grab a cup of coffee real fast?
Yeah, sure.
Just
No
a
problem.
second. Okay, I have a question too.
Sure.
In which way AI is autonomy? I mean, they have to obey by a set of rules, right? But they also have some level of autonomy. And I am studying autonomy in the way that you're capable of self-ruling yourself. Which kind of autonomy is seen in the AI systems?
Well, that is part a little bit of the discussion because, of course, it depends on what we consider autonomy. And here in this paper, Velas is trying to make a case for some idea of autonomy or some idea of agency and try to see if this we can call this system really autonomous, right? Her answer will be we can't. It's
Yeah,
not
but I mean, they are
with
they make their own decisions. This is, we can see
it's
that.
not about making, it's kind of making their own decision, but they are learning system, which means that they can learn, and by with what they learn, they then make this kind of decisions, right? They like compel of sorts of information and then build up something like a concept, a conceivement, an idea, right? They kind of, we can kind of maybe say that they generate some idea, because now we're talking, of course, about generative AI, right? Like when we ask for the open AI chat to make an image, like we are asking them to create, they are not copying something else. They are grabbing all the information and trying to create something new, right? Which is kind of what we do in some sense, that we think about how we express art. We are gathering all this perceptive, sensitive information and producing something with creativity, right? Of course, the problem is if we can attribute spontaneous and creativity to the system. But the thing is, they generate themselves because they learn how to, right? And they kind of becomes a thing. But of course, in one sense, they have the source of liberty of self-determination as we have, because if the developer, like we saw that, right? For instance, how in Google research they have discriminatory algorithms, right? Then after all the discussion, they build up again the system to avoid it, right? So they put a limit. So the system could not suggest in the research page for phrases or ideas that will discriminate, right? They took it off, for instance. But of course, the problem is they are difficult to map, because we take, like, for instance, we can put in the system that the system cannot speak in certain ways, right? We saw that in the development of ChatGPT. In the first one, the first ChatGPT, we could ask for ChatGPT if something is morally right and wrong. For instance, how we solve the trolley problem, right? They will give a reply based on how the information usually respond, right? If people usually, the major information is that we switch the tracks and try to save more people, then that's the right thing to do. Now, if you ask for the ChatGPT to solve the trolley problem, the answer is, I don't have a moral system, I can reply that question. Right? That was built up in the system. Also, the first ChatGPT could, for instance, teach someone to commit suicide. Now they can't, right? So there is limit to the self-determination, but yet this is a direct kind of algorithm, a direct kind of order that depends a certain linguistic level. If we try to talk with ChatGPT, not using maybe the banned words, like, we can overlap the system, right? We can make him teach us a suicidal experiment or how to do it. If we can talk with him in a way that doesn't get the certain words of ideas that he's not built to answer anymore, right? But there is a level of autonomy in the sense that they are making a decision, right? The input, for instance, when you think about, well, how they are being used to hire someone, right? The AI system get all the curriculum, get all the information. They have some sort of metrics of what the company wants, what they need, what is a good resume, a good curriculum, but they do the decision. They say this, and this in the end of the day, based on and because they are learning, then we don't need to the developer to say, well, good job, now do it again in the same metrics, right? They were learning, like, well, I selected this, the company gets this, it worked, therefore they're looking for this, and it learned from it. right? They learn from all these decisions to make another and new one. So it goes beyond the metrics, right? That's the thing when we saw, for instance, in the Amazon case, right? That we saw that I think it's with 2019, that we saw a big algorithmic discrimination in the HR system that was using an AI system to hire, because were not hiring colored people, right? There's a very much large percentage of resumes that was being chosen by the system who were from white workers, right? And that was not in the metrics of the developer. They learn that this is the kind of curriculum that the company wants more, right? That they made a decision about what is the best curriculum. And in that sense, we call them autonomous because they are making decisions. So the decision making have some sort of agency. Yeah, but then we can go to discussion, right? That is this decision making a way of self-determination? Then this discussion begins to be a little more difficult, right? Because it is, but it isn't autonomous. I guess we have this feeling where we are discussing the system, right? But either way is all right, but we need to answer that in order to think about how we make responsibility when something like that happened, right? Because, well, I was talking about this HR AI system. Okay, now that's happened, what we'll do? We'll charge Amazon, we'll charge the development of the system, we'll charge the company who owns this right, we'll charge the system itself, right? We shut down, or what we're supposed to do in these cases. So the idea of self-determination, Velas will say, well, although it's a very important tool to protect moral agency, is not a property of the agent itself, right? So therefore, it cannot be a criteria for moral agency, because it's more like because when we talk about self-determination, we talk more on the right venue, right? We are talking about being given the right, the guarantee to self-determination. It's like we should let people decide what are good life for them. Like this discussion in ethics and moral philosophy theory, that the pluralist view argues for the self-determination. But the pluralism is not a property of people, but it is a legal guarantee, right? More than anything, like a tool in that sense. So the other criteria is authenticity. And she says, well, we can imagine inauthentic moral agents that are moral agents nonetheless. And authenticity, of course, deal with this intention, right? What we intend to do, what our will to do in certain circumstances. Consider a person who does not trust her deepest convictions and instead acts imitating others. Such behavior makes her less admirable as moral agents, but her inauthenticity, unless it were caused by some cognitive deficiency that will question her competence, is no reason to question her moral agency, right? Even though if you're not acting as you would, right, that's your instinct, or as you think you would in that situation, according to your selfhood, for instance, in this case, when you're imitating other, that doesn't question the possibility of your being a moral agent, because you're making an autonomous decision here, right? You are saying, well, I think that's right, but everyone else think is wrong, then I will act as something else, right? This has a level of autonomous thinking. So authenticity is also not the best criteria, because the intention of the person doesn't make or the intention with the self-image doesn't make the whole for the moral agents case. The next one is self-identification and heroism, right? This is like, I think is very less common in the literature about autonomous, but she is trying to deal with all this criteria that she find in the literature. She'll say the autonomous person on this account is one who is able to self-identify with her desires and has a coherent self-image. Most people have done something at some point in their life that was out of character for them, with which they did not self-identify. Right? Here she's saying, well, of course, self-identification, have a self-image is important to how we conceive ourselves as moral agency. But it's possible for, even though we are moral agents with self-image, that will act in some way that will not be in accordance to our self-image, right? For instance, we can think, I don't know, have a self-image of being a moral, righteous person that will not keep the money you found on the street, they will try to give it back, right? But it's still, even though you have this self-image, it is possible that someone with that self-image would keep the money, right? So it is possible to think an act that is out of character. So it's important, but it's also not decisive. That's the point here. Heroism is having an idea, can help us assess how close or far a person or an action is from the best it could be, but it cannot be a criterion for moral agency. If only the few who reach the ideal were to be considered moral agents, most competent adults would fail the test of moral agents, right? This idea is like a self-governance, is like we act throughout this ideal of justice, of morality, and we are heroic in the sense that we move forward to this ideal, right? But the thing is, people are not heroic usually. They don't act like it, right? So if you take this seriously, she says that almost all adult moral agents will not be considered moral agents because they can't match the ideal, and that's something to do with the latter one, that is self-identification, right? You are not the moral hero that your self-image makes you to be, right? Because in the decision making, the things get more complicated than that. And then what she considered the most important one, that she spent more time in it, is about self-governance and reason responsiveness, right? And of course, self-governance is a capability of being autonomous in the general sense that we were talking about, but also to be like the reason responsiveness is in the sense that if I could give you good reasons, you would consider it, imply it, because it was good reasons too, right? It's a kind of reasoning that our mind have, in a sense that we can understand and see throughout this justification. So she will say, moral agents make decisions and act accordingly, at least partly, because they are responding to reasons. If an entity is not the kind of creature who can understand reasons, then she will not govern herself in a way that is relevant for morality, right? So why we act right or wrong? Because we have reasons to. Even though then this is more easy for Velas to understand when, for instance, a person acts out of character, right? They have some sort of reason to. They were responses to another set of reason, right? I will not keep in my self-image, I will not keep the money, but I have reasons to, because I'm lacking money right now, I need to buy something, etc., etc. Like, is acting throughout this reasoning. Continue, she'll say, we do not need to ask an algorithm its permission to modify it or even terminate because algorithms do not have values of their own. They do not care about their own existence, nor can they respond to reasons qua reasons. You cannot persuade an algorithm to do something through giving it good reasons. You can only program it one way or another, right? It's not the same reasoning she's saying here. You can respond to it, but the way that an algorithm responds is not reasons for reasons. He doesn't have this idea of, well, this is a good reason, maybe I should act like that, right? He's like, if he's programmed to learn from you, for instance, as ChatGPT, probably he will see your reasoning as the reasoning he must copy, which is different from he conceiving that your reasoning is a good reasoning itself, right? That's the different thing here. And that's important. Why? Because the whole thing about moral agents is that the moral agents can only be attributed to people, to instance that has values. And these values is not just, for instance, ranking, ordering, preferring, but is having an experience like value. See, it's like values are not just something you can rank, that you can order, that you can just in a linguistic way say, well, value X is better than value Y. But there is some experience like valuing something, right? Or for instance, when you don't have access to something with value, or when you lose something that we values, it's attached to some kind of feelings. It moves with us in another sense that just a formal value, right? And that's the kind of the valorative experience is important to moral agents, according to our author here. She says, a robot could respond to its environment in a way that are in accordance with ethics. For instance, for example, if we see a human being carrying something heavily, it offers to carry it for them. Like a robot who have a perception of someone lifting a lot of weight and would provide some aid. That a human being is struggling with carrying her groceries, and that it will be effortless for the robot to carry them for her, however, is not a reason for the robot, is an instruction. He's not reasoning about it. He's programmed to do that in that circumstance, right? A reason for moral agents amounts to something that matters to us, and that matters to us in the sense of value, right? Something that we value, that matters, that we care about because we understand its moral significance. So the whole point here seems to be that she's claiming that valuing something is like having some sort of qualia experience, a conscious experience of value itself. And that's why we can reason qua reason, right? Understand the reasoning and the moral relevance of a set of values. So if that's the case, she'll go to the end of the paper arguing for not considering algorithm moral agents, as we shouldn't, of course, moral zombies as well. He'll say, just as algorithms are not autonomous, they are not accountable. And of course, here accountability is one of the major principles in AI ethics, right? But the accountability is being able to have explainability, which means that if we can see that when we look at the outcome of some AI system, we can make it accountable, explain how we get there, right? We cannot have all the answers, but we can at least have a direction of how we went through, have this guidance. This is making an accountable AI system, right? But he's saying it's not accountable in a way that we consider moral agents accountable. As accountable beings, we are unanswerable to others for how we lead our lives. That is, we can recognize other interested and moral claims, and when we do not respect them, we are liable to be subject of blame or even punish it.
Yeah,
An
that's the
algorithm.
thing.
Yes, please.
Responsibility comes after we define if the AI is able to make decisions, no?
That comes after.
Yes.
Yeah, and the thing is, exactly, he cannot be autonomous, even though you call them autonomous system, and therefore they can be responsible also. That's the point. You're saying autonomous system AI system cannot be moral agents, therefore they cannot be responsible for what they are doing. And that goes back to her hypothesis. If they cannot, we should be blaming or holding someone else accountable for, right? And that's what she is defending in this paper, that we should consider other accountable for. And she will end up this paper saying, well, it's always a human being that's accountable for how these systems work. And that's how we should think about AI ethics, right? Looking in this perspective, because of course this is a debate in the field, right? How we can consider, because of course the developers don't like very much this hypothesis here, because they need to then and like, is the company, is the buyer, is the one who developed it's a difficult question to be made, because if you look at the AI developers, they usually respond to some demand, right? Or doing their jobs is a difficult discussion here too. But her point here, what she's trying to defend in this paper is that either way, to how we will look, how we'll deal with, we can avoid to consider human accountability, because the system are not accountable themselves, and that's the way she tried to argue for it, right? And the major thing is because they are not subject to blame or punishment, or to pleasure, right, and pain somehow, and therefore we can't give them any sort of responsibility. An algorithm cluster does not think about the suffering it might be causing by encountering vulnerable person to take out heavy loans to pay for a degree at a for-profit college that is worth little or nothing. When wronged by an algorithm, it will not occur to us to punish it or ask it for compensation. Rather, we will seek redress from the people who designed it, implement, and were supposed to supervise the algorithm. Yeah. And the main reason is, again, we can give the instruction that something is right or wrong, but we can expect that he feels the right and wrong in some way. He's not accountable in that sense, right? We can say, well, you did something wrong. To the system is like, okay, this is an information. This is a sentence. I can understand the sentence, but has nothing more in this experience. So she will end up saying, well, sentience serves as the foundation for an internal moral lab that guides us in action. When we think about doing something, we imagine the possible consequences we might cause and consider the kind of pleasure or pain we might create, which motivate us to act on another way. At most, for an AI system that feels nothing, value will be an item on the list, right? This is the whole idea that why value should be considered a quality experience, of a conscious experience, because to us, for us, a value is not just something in a list or a ranking or a criteria. It's something we feel like, we value as a feeling, right? Possibly prioritize in a certain way according to a number that preserve its weightiness, how much we consider. In the end of the article, she will make some sort of to try to respond some sort of objections that might have that was called the functional equivalence objection, that it will say if acts or functions like could be considered like, right? And we say, and the point for her is no, because it lacks the experience, right? It will be the same as she goes back to the zombie argument. act like us, it's exactly like us, but doesn't have a like us, a like it feeling, and therefore, even though functions equally, is not the same thing because it has another quality to it. The driver's objection that we'll consider that is just about motivation, and then motivation could be applied to the system, but she's saying, well, but the motivation for do something is different from feeling. Who can feel motivation from you giving motivation as a value to an AI system, right? Some is like in the driver's objection will be like, well, you can make a system imitate or act like it has drive, but will be different than actually having the experience of having drive, certain wheels. And the other is the general intelligent objection that to recall, this is the discussion basically of the super intelligence, right? That is different way of reasoning and thinking and have a different kind of intelligence associated with it. But for her point will be, yeah, they are super intelligent. They are some sort of same logic between how we conceive things and how the system conceive things, because we are inputting our way of thinking in them, of way of seeing the world in them. But the point here goes back to the Mary experience. That is something like to feeling, the feeling of seeing a red that is different from knowing about red. And that makes two kind of intelligence that is different, right? That the intelligence that Mary has having the experience of color is different from the knowledge of color itself. And so to finish here, so when algorithm calls moral, I mistyped something here. When algorithm says, I think it's like behavior, has a moral behavior, as they often do. We must look to the human being who designed, programmed, commissioned, implemented, and we're supposed to supervise them to assign the appropriate blame, right? So her point is we cannot blame the intelligent system itself, but we should blame the people who build it. And of course, the two questions that we can leave open to the rest of the seminar, the discussion. The first is between that mention, who was to blame, right? Is the developer, is the company, is the one who hired developer? I mean, what scale of responsibility we are talking about? And the second one is like, if it's true that we assume that the AI system doesn't have moral values, we go to the discussion that AI systems should align it to make an alignment with human values, because we are the one who values things. The problem is that instant will also assume that we have a same way of valuing, right? That's like when we call what is human values, we will have an answer. And the thing is, in moral ethics, we don't, right? To do with what kind of moral thinking the AI system will reply if humans doesn't have the same idea about morality. So how we do align that through the system, the plurality of moral perspective into one system, right? So that's another difficulty and a challenge when we talk about AI alignment. So I think was kind of that prepared from the text, but I thought that the discussion to think about this AI system and algorithm through the lenses of this philosophical zombie experiment was an interesting way of responding. I found it very solid way of reasoning, at least.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. And as Nita said, it's not a finished discussion that we can present here the final debate, right? We can, if you look, we have a lot of videos and presentations and discussion between Dennett and Chalmers in the sense of what is a conscious mind, right? So I think it's an open field, but I do think that the intention of this paper is in the right place, in the sense that I think we can talk about philosophy of mind very similar or very close to AI system discussions, right? Because if depending what we consider conscious, intelligence, experience, value, as we respond to these kind of things, we will have some metrics and guides and more to say about AI ethics in the end of the day, right? I think that's important for us to understand what kind of system, and if you say, well, we should have human-centered AI system, right? This should be a principle and the most important one, right? But why, first of all, and what do you mean by human-centered, right? Because it means human values, but what is human values? How we need to know them to teach to a machine, right? That's the challenge here now. And we are now talking a lot about alignment, but that's the challenge of alignment. To whom, right? Because we are talking politics in the beginning of this class. Like, if you go to the different poles of opinion, probably you don't have the same moral values in the end of the day, right? We have different perspectives, and to what of them should AI system align to? So that's the open question, I guess. I guess Nita is not with us anymore. He had a meeting at 11 something, and I think he just leave it open for us. But I don't know, Gab, if you have any more questions or comments before we leave.
No.
I hope I could make it clear, at least
Yes,
the
it's a
general
new
point.
subject for me, but I liked it. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know, so I think this is a win.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most we can hope for a Tuesday.
So yeah,
All
and
right, then
I have like a little bit of some new things to think about, like what is autonomy in the EI, which I'm working on autonomy right now, and what is human values as fundamental rights. That's another thing that I'm working on. So a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it can associate with that a lot with this kind of discussion, which is interesting. We'll send an email regarding next week. I think we'll have, but we'll have like a shift presentation, because we will be having the UNPOF meetings
True.
next week, and unfortunately I will have a talk. It's online, but I will have at 10 to 10:50. So I will need to leave at 10 and then come back at 10:50. At 10:30.
And another question, I missed last Wednesday class. Do you know if he is on YouTube already?
I guess so. We usually goes directly to the Nita's page. It goes in the live page.
Okay. Okay.
You can find there. I think it is.
Thank you.
No problem. Well, we will send them an email to just following up with the reading and how we'll organize the meeting next week. But we will have, right? Of course, we'll have. The thing is, I think I will be presenting of the first half and Nita on the second. But
Perfect.
we'll send an email to clarify that.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Gabi, for
Thank
today.
you.
Have a nice week.
You too. Till tomorrow, actually.
Yeah, till tomorrow. Yeah.
Bye.